Hypocrisy. A room with sky colored with walls. The Blue Room. There was a room on the third floor, an old campus dormitory. Its walls were painted the color of cloudless afternoon, sky blue, though now slightly dulled by years of subside and silence. The kind of room that swallowed noise and offered back only the hum of breath, the turning of pages, or the faint sound of wind pressing its palm against the window pane. In that room lived Elia, a girl of 19 with a quiet presence that filled a space like moonlight. Never loud, never demanding, but impossible to unsee at once you truly looked. She had the kind of face that changed with the lights in the morning sun. Her features seemed awake with curiosity, eyes tracing the windows between book pages, lips barely parted, as if always ready to whisper something meaningful to no one in particular. At nights, beneath the glow of paper lantern, she looked older, more ghostly, like someone remembering how they used to be. Elia's room was neat but not rigid. Her bed was made with soft cotton sheets the color of chamomile. On the desk by the window, or porcelain teacup rested permanently on a coaster shaped like a leaf. The scent of dried lavender clung to the air. There were stacks of worn poetry books, most of them notated in a pencil with lines underlined like battle scars. And on the walls, tiny square birds fluttered like colored feathers, each carrying a quote, a line, a fragment of thoughts that had once meant enough to say, We all we are all stardust and stories. No one sees you the way the mirror does. To feel deeply is not a weakness. She never explained them to anyone. No one ever asked. Alia had a ritual at exactly 4 in the afternoon. She brewed a small pot of rose tea. She would sit by the window, sip slowly, and let her mind drift. Not into sleep, but into thought. These were her hours of invincible living. She would imagine lives she hadn't the courage to lead, conversations she didn't know how to start, and version of herself that didn't flinch at the weight of the world. Outside, students walked to and from the campus library, their footsteps echoing in hurried patterns. Laughter sometimes floated upward, but it never quite reached Alia's room in full. She wasn't lonely, at least not in the way people imagine loneliness. She simply found most noises unnecessary, like trying to talk over a song that had already said what she felt. There was a notebook she never showed anyone, not even Nadine, her roommate for 2 years ago, who had tried. Not even her mother, who called every Sunday to ask how her little writer was doing. Elia wrote in that notebook like late night, always by candlelight, as if the dark itself needed to be present for her to be fully honest. Her entries weren't always coherent. I was the moon blind today, maybe it was just me. I don't think people see me, I think they see the idea of me. My silence isn't quiet, it screams where no one listens. She has secrets blocked too, hidden under layers of pseudonyms and poetic usernames. There, she poured her inner landscape, just that camouflage sorrow that lingered like fog, the way she longed for someone to sit beside her and just to stay without needing her to speak. And yet, Elia was admired. She had graceful kind of detachment that intrigued people. Professor praised her essay. Classmates noticed her styles. Minimal but poetic, oversized sweaters, earthy color, the occasional flower tucked into her hair. People often said she had an old soul. What they meant was she seemed more thoughtful than the rest of us. What they missed was she often felt older than she wanted to be. From time to time, people would attempt to get close, but the truth was, no one had yet stayed long enough to see the layers under her jealousness. Some tried to pry her open like puzzle, others drifted away when they couldn't understand her silences, but Alia didn't resent them. She understood that most people weren't meant to stay, some were just passing shadows across her sky blue walls. Only once or twice had someone left behind a mark she couldn't erase. She touched one of the posters on the wall, the ink slightly faded. People are temporary, but the way they make you feel that stays. Outside, the day began to cool into dusk. Golden light spilled into the room, catching the curve of her cheek, the glint of her hair. The blue walls turned lavender. Her shadow stretched along on the wooden floor, a soft echo of a self still forming. And as the wind shifted the window curtain, Elia whispered, not to herself, but to the lights, the silence, and whatever version of herself may be listening. One day, I'll be seen, fully, gently, not for how I hide, but for how I still hope. The blue room listened. It always did. The mirror and the mask. Every morning before stepping outside, Alia stood before a mirror, not for vanity, not for perfection, just to make sure that version of herself being presented to be the world looked solid enough to pass. She would smooth her blouse, pat down her hair, and meet her own eyes with the kind of gaze you give to a stranger on a train. Curious, detached, fleeting. The mirror didn't lie, but it didn't always reveal either. Sometimes she wondered which one of us is more real, the girl in the class or the girl walking away from it. On campus, Alia moved through the world with studied grace. She wasn't invincible, but neither was she fully seen. People smiled at her, some even lingered, but their interactions often stopped at pleasantries, like pebbles skipping across a deep lake. No one asked what she was thinking. No one saw her writing, hand tremble when she scribbled poetry in the corner of the cafe. No one noticed when she stared too long at empty spaces, as if looking for something already lost. And yet she became known, not for who she was, but for how people imagined her. The girl always wears flowers. She must be romantic. She's probably the top student in literature, mysterious, intense, but she writes at poetry. They were all right. They were all wrong. Then, one Thursday morning, Nadine entered her world like a drop of ink on a still water. Nadine was everything Alia was not: bright-voiced, impulsive, always with wind in her hair and mismatched earrings, a transferred student with a major in psychology and habit of offering pieces of herself to strangers like hard candy. They met in the campus cafe, both reaching for the last lemon muffin. Nadine grinded. You go first, son. You look like you needed more. Alia blinked. That obvious? Your eyes are screaming. I haven't slept in years. Nadine's voice was light, but her gaze was focused. Too focused. Alia hesitated, then accepted the muffin. From then on, Nadine became a quiet presence, not overwhelming but curious. She sat beside Alia in lectures. She asked strange, delightful questions out of nowhere. Do you believe people can sense your existence before you say a word? And she didn't flinch when Alia stayed silent. But what unsettled Alia wasn't Nadine's brightness, it was her attention. Real attention, the kind that pressed gently against the walls Alia had spent years building. One day, Nadine caught her tracing the scar on her wrist under the table, a tiny line, barely visible. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly. Alia's stomach twisted. She forced a smile. "It's just a reminder of that I once believed something painful would last forever. It didn't." Nadine nodded slowly. She didn't push, but she stayed a little longer that day. Long enough that Alia forgot to be afraid. Later that night, in front of her mirror, Alia looked at herself again, but this time something was different. She had let someone see part of her, just a sliver, and the world hadn't shattered. Still, the mirror remained a ritual. She needed it, not for validation, but for reassurance that her mask hadn't slipped too far, that the calm she wore in public still fit, that no one could see how often her hands curled into fists inside her coat pockets. Because the truth was, Alia was tired. Tired of performing composer, tired of answering "I'm okay" when she wasn't, tired of being the version of herself people found palatable, poetic, quiet, self-contained, while inside she was chaos and longing and wildfire trying not to burn anyone. She whispered to the girl in the mirror, "You're doing well, you're holding on." But even she didn't know how much longer she could. Outside, laughter rose from the courtyard. Students gathered like birds on wires, buzzing with weekend plans and loud affection. Alia leaned on the window frame, forehead against the glass. She didn't envy them, but she did wonder what it felt like not to guard yourself all the time. Down below, she saw Nadine walking, twirling in a pen between her fingers. She paused, looked up, and smiled. Alia's heart did something unfamiliar. It softened. Maybe, just maybe, someone had begun to see through the mask, and maybe, just maybe, she was ready to be seen, even if only by one. A crack in the sky. It started with a question, not loud one, even asked aloud. "Will you still stay when I'm not beautiful in silence?" That was the question wrote on a post-it. Her handwriting trembling slightly, stuck it onto her mirror. She stared at it for a while, then turned away before the answer could form. The day passed, with Nadine slowly becoming part of Alia's rhythm, not an intrusion, but the new note added to an old song. She began appearing at the cafe with an extra cup of tea. She brought sunflowers one morning, saying, "I saw this and thought on you. Kind and bright, even if no one noticed." And Alia, who had never liked sunflowers before, pressed one between the pages of her journal that night. But what truly cracked Alia open wasn't the gifts, it was the stillness. Nadine knew how to be quiet, not in a way people were when they didn't know what to say, but in a way that made silence feel like company instead of absence. One rainy afternoon, they sat in the blue room, tea cooling between them. The sound of water against the window filled the space like breath. Nadine sat cross-legged on the rug, reading aloud from a psychology textbook, while Alia lay on her bed, eyes unfocused. Then suddenly Alia whispered, "I'm not okay all the time." Nadine looked up, her expression unchanged. "I didn't think you were." The words settled like a blanket, warm and choking. Alia turned her face to the wall. "I don't know what's wrong with me. Some days I wake up and I feel like I can carry the world. Other days, I can't even brush my hair." Set the book down. She crawled closer, not touching, just sitting beside the bed. "You don't need to name it for it to be real," she said softly. But if you want to talk about it, I'll listen. It wasn't pity in her voice, it wasn't concern with in performance. It was real, present, gentle. And Alia, who had spent years building her inner world like a cathedral no one else could enter, felt something shift. She spoke, not everything, but enough. She told Nadine about the days when her emotion came in waves too large for her body, about the journal she filled with thoughts she couldn't say aloud, but about the medication she took inconsistently, about the fear that she would never be enough, never be stable, never be lovable. And Nadine listened, not like someone waiting to respond, but like someone offering shelter. When the rain stopped, Alia had said more than she ever had to anyone. Nadine finally asked, "Does it scare you the way you feel?" Alia nodded. "Me too," Nadine said. "Sometimes the brightness in me burns and sometimes it fades." That was the first moment Alia realized Nadine wasn't just sunlight, she had her own storm too. The next day, Alia wrote in her notebook, "We are two storms trying to not flood each other, but oh, how beautiful when we were side by side." And for the first time in a long time, the sky-colored room felt like a place not just to hide but to heal. When silence speaks back, the blue room had changed. He used to echo with Alia's silence, a silence born from caution, from fear, from the long practice of disappearing in plain sight. But lately, the silence had become something else. It hummed with memory, it breathed with presence, it whispered Nadine's laughter in the corners, in her question hanging in the air like lanterns. One evening, Alice returned from class to find a note slid under her door, a folded piece of paper, and Nadine's handwriting. You said the sky was made you feel, but hope one day. Alice sat down and stared at it, the note was trembling slowly in her fingers. Her chest ached, not in pain, but with something blooming too wide to contain. She tucked the note into the side of her mirror, looked at her reflection. She looked tired, yes, but softer now. A little more open, little less ghost. Less ghost. The weekend, Nadine invited her on small trip to the outskirts of town. "No pressure," she said, "but there's a hill I like. You can see everything from up there, even the parts of yourself you forgot." Alia said yes. The walk was long and her limbs resisted, but Nadine kept patiently. They didn't talk much on the way. Only little things, favorite colors, songs that hurts, dreams they half remembered. At the top, they sat on path of grass overlooking a restless field. The city lights flickered in the distance like a heartbeat. "I used to come here to scream," Nadine said quietly. "But one day I just said, that helped more." Alia pulled her knees to her chest. "I never let myself fall apart in front of anyone." Nadine's reply was simple. "Then let me be the voice." Alia blinked. Tears welled, uninvited. She tried to breathe through them, but they came anyway. Not loud, not violent, just true. Nadine reached out and took her hand. They stayed like that, palms joined, the wind cool against their face, silence curling around them like something sacred. Alia whispered, "I've been afraid of being a burden." "You're not," Nadine said. "Your poem, learning it doesn't have to rhyme to matter." Alia looked up at the sky. It was pale blue, almost the color of her walls. Maybe this was what it felt like to begin again, to be known, not perfectly, but honestly, to be loved, not despite the chaos but within it. When they returned to campus, Alia entered her room and stood before her mirror once more, but this time she smiled not because everything was okay, but because she was. She looked at her, flashing touched the note on the glass and whispered, I wanna see the sky with her. A roof with no walls, spring crept made quiet, softening the edge of the theme. The trees on the campus were blown across the air turned warm and expectations stood in Alia beginning under the sun. Life was blooming again, and for once so was Alia. Her room no longer felt like a hiding place. It became something else entirely, a sanctuary, not one built to keep the world caught, but one that invited the world in. Slowly, gently, through a door she had finally began to unlock. But lay open her floor now. There's pints of fern sharing, a priced sunflower picked from her poetry journal, and on the wall, where once there was nothing but soft blue, she had pinned photographs of sunlight on Nathan's curls of the hill where she first cried without apology, of her own half-smiling face in mid-laughter. She was no longer surviving. She was learning how to live. One afternoon, Alia found Nathan waiting outside her building with two bikes and gleam in her eyes. I wanna take you somewhere, Nathan said. Is when your impulsive sort of expedition? Alia smiled. Absolutely, but this time you're steering the road towards the river bank. Wind brushing their skin, laps are swirling behind them like ribbons when they reach the edge of the water. Nadine stopped. Do you remember? She said breathless. What you told me on a hill? Alia looked at her. Which part? That you weren't sure you could ever be foolish. Alia nodded. And then stepped closer. Well, I see you, and even if you vanish again, even if the world forget, I won't. The quiet that followed wasn't hollow, it was whole. Alia reached for Nadine's hand, pulled her in gently, forehead resting on Ken's hers. I used to think love had to be loud, traumatic, all or nothing, she whispered. But this year, it's like finding a rhythm that matches the beat of my mind. Nadine smiled. Then, let's keep dancing. They didn't need declaration, they didn't need promises scrawled in the stars. What they had was now, and now was enough. That night, back in her room, Ada stood before her mirror one last time. She reached up and peeled out the old post-it note, the one that asked if someone would stay when she wasn't beautiful in silence. She replaced it with a new one. I am more than what breaks me, and I am loved even when I tremble. The room with sky-colored walls had become a room with no walls at all, because love had entered it, and love, as Alia now understood, didn't ask for perfection, it asked only for presence.